All right, so today we're doing a deep dive into Hamilton Lane, HLNE. They're a pretty major player when it comes to private markets, and you've given me a ton to work with here. Their annual 10K reports from 2021 to 2024. I mean, talk about a gold mine of information. You know, people might not think much of 10K's super dry financial documents, right? But honestly, they're like a company's secret diary, full of juicy details about how they operate, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And we're going to crack the code today and see what makes Hamilton Lane tick. And joining me on this little adventure is our expert, ready to illuminate the fascinating world of Hamilton Lane.
Absolutely. Private markets, they can seem a bit like a mysterious club sometimes, but their impact, huge. On the global economy, I mean. What Hamilton Lane does is essentially act as this guide for these big-time investors. Like, think pension funds, endowments, the big guys, helping them navigate the often very complicated world of private equity, venture capital, all of that. They even put together these specialized funds, offer advisory services, and it's all to try and squeeze out the best possible returns in this, shall we say, exclusive market.
It's kind of wild when you think about it. The influence that a company like Hamilton Lane has.
Right.
Managing huge sums of money.
Right.
Shaping investment strategies for, well, some of the biggest financial players in the world.
Exactly. It's not just about managing the money itself. It's about influencing where that money goes.
Which then has this ripple effect.
Exactly.
On industries.
Entire economies even.
Global trends even.
It all traces back,
Yeah.
in a way.
So, okay, let's dive into this business model a bit. In the 2021 10K, something caught my eye. They've got this dual-class stock structure with something called Class B shares.
Oh.
Get this, those get 10 votes per share. 10. Seems like a lot of power concentrated in one little share. Let's deal with that.
You've hit on a really important point. Imagine a company, right? And they've got their, let's say, regular shares.
Okay.
And then they've got these VIP shares that get 10 times the voting power.
Wow.
That's essentially what we're talking about here. It's not completely unheard of, especially for companies that are going public.
Right.
But the specific way they've got it set up at Hamilton Lane, well, that's worth looking at a little closer.
Okay.
Basically, it gives certain stakeholders, mainly the founders and early investors,
It gives them a much bigger say in how the companies run.
so they've got more control over big decisions.
Exactly.
Like electing board members
Yeah.
or, say, approving major company moves,
Right.
mergers, acquisitions, that kind of thing.
All of that.
So it's like they've got this, I don't know, special voting power, but it's not forever, right? There's this sunset provision that I saw. Seems like those super voting rights, they eventually expire. So what triggers that?
Yeah, you're on the money. It's not like a permanent thing. It's kind of like a sunset clause you might see in a contract.
Right.
And the 2021 report, it actually spells out a few different scenarios. One is if the founder's ownership dips below a certain percentage.
Okay.
Another is if there are some key personnel changes.
Interesting.
And then there's the just plain old clock running out.
Which is when March 31st, 2027.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
5 years after the second founder passes away, whichever comes later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's bring this back to the average investor like myself.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about buying some HLNE stock. Is this whole dual class structure,
Yeah.
is that like a red flag?
It's a great question. And it's really going to depend on, your personal risk tolerance.
Okay.
Some people, they might see it as a bit of a risk.
Yeah.
You've got a small group of people with a lot of control,
Right.
even if it's not forever.
Right.
But then others, they might not be so bothered.
Especially if they really believe in the founders.
Exactly. If they trust their long-term vision for the company.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It really comes down to, does their structure align with your own personal investment philosophy?
Right.
Right.
It's about feeling comfortable with how things are run.
Exactly.
Okay. So moving on, something else I noticed while I was combing through these reports.
Yeah.
In 2021, Hamilton Lane, they decided to move their offices from Bala-Cynwyd to Conshohocken.
A bit of a change of scenery?
Yeah, both in Pennsylvania, so not a huge move.
Right, right.
But still, what's the story there? Was it just, they needed a change? Or was there something more strategic going on?
I mean, rarely do companies relocate just for the view, right?
So-
And the 10K, it doesn't really dive into the specifics of why they moved, but it is interesting to think about what the strategic implications might be.
Like what?
Well, sometimes companies, they'll relocate to try and tap into a better talent pool.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe they're looking for lower operating costs,
Makes sense.
or maybe they want to be closer to their clients or to some kind of industry hub.
So it's all about being in the right place at the right time.
Exactly.
So this move to Conshohocken, it could be a sign that they were thinking ahead,
It's possible.
trying to position themselves for future growth.
Right, right.
Or maybe to attract some top-tier talent.
It makes you wonder, what were they hoping to achieve?
Yeah.
It's like they're playing chess, you know?
Right.
Every move is strategic.
Got to think a few steps ahead.
Exactly.
Okay, so speaking of strategy,
Yeah.
one thing that really stood out to me was their focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They've actually had a whole council dedicated to this since way back in 2016, which, in the finance world, let's be honest, not exactly known for being the most diverse industry.
That's true.
So this seems like a pretty big deal. But are they actually walking the walk, or is it just for show?
Well, it's one thing to create a council. It's another thing entirely to see real, tangible change.
Right.
But to be fair to Hamilton Lane, it does seem like they're actually taking some concrete steps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, their 2022 report, it actually talks about some of the work the council has done, especially when it comes to creating a more inclusive and diverse work environment.
So they're trying to change the culture from within?
Exactly.
And what about their investment strategies?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They've started incorporating what's called ESG factors into their investment process.
ESG?
It stands for environmental, social, and governance.
Okay.
So basically, they're looking at things like board diversity,
Right.
workplace conditions,
Mm-hmm.
even a company's overall social impact. All of that factors into where they decide to invest their clients' money.
So it's not just about making money, it's about making a difference.
Absolutely. It's what they call purpose-driven investing.
I like that.
Yeah, and it's smart too, especially with more and more investors specifically looking for these kinds of ESG-focused investments.
It's like their values are aligning with a growing market demand.
Exactly.
Very savvy.
All right, so while we're on the topic of what Hamilton Lane offers, there's this one service I found really interesting. They call it distribution management.
Okay.
Sounds kind of simple, right?
Yeah.
But the more I dug into it, the more complex it seemed.
Really? Okay. Break it down for me.
So you know how in private markets you don't get those regular stock dividends like you do on the public market? Instead, you often get what are called distributions. Basically, it's like securities from the funds you've invested in.
Okay.
But here's the thing. These securities, they're not so easy to sell.
How come?
Well, for one thing, they're not traded on any public exchange.
Oh, I see.
So if you're just an individual investor trying to find a buyer, it can be a real pain.
So that's where Hamilton Lane swoops in,
Exactly.
like a knight in shining armor.
They're like the specialized real estate agents of the securities world.
Okay.
They have the expertise, the connections, they know the market inside and out.
So they can connect the sellers with the buyers.
Exactly, and they handle the whole process.
It's like a win-win.
Right.
The clients get the help they need.
And Hamilton Lane generates some extra revenue.
Speaking of which, how do they actually make money from this?
Usually they'll charge fees based on the proceeds from the sale of the securities.
Right.
Or sometimes it's a percentage of the total assets they're managing through that whole distribution process.
Interesting. It's pretty clever how they've found this niche for themselves,
Right.
adding value for their clients.
And creating a nice little revenue stream while they're at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about. I kept coming across this phrase, tax receivable agreement.
Yeah.
Honestly, it sounds kind of intimidating.
I can imagine.
Can you demystify it for us?
I'll do my best. So basically, it all goes back to when Hamilton Lane went public with their IPO.
Right.
And then there were some other transactions where they were acquiring more ownership in their operating company, HLA.
Okay.
This agreement, it's essentially a way to divide up any potential tax benefits from all those deals.
So between Hamilton Lane,
And some of the former owners of HLA.
interesting. So it's like they're making sure everyone gets their fair share of the tax advantages.
Exactly.
Right.
Basically, the agreement requires Hamilton Lane to pay out a percentage of any future cash tax savings they get. Specifically, savings that are tied to those increased tax deductions from acquiring more of HLA.
Okay, so I get the gist of it.
Yeah.
But in plain English, what does this actually mean for their financials?
Well, the main thing to keep in mind is that this agreement, it's going to have some impact on their cash flow down the line
Okay.
and their profitability.
How so?
They've got this obligation to share a portion of any tax savings,
Right.
which could end up affecting their bottom line.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on.
It's wild how much these little details can actually impact a company's bottom line. It's like it's like finding hidden clues in a detective novel or something. But speaking of challenges, one thing I always think about is competition, especially in the investment world, right? It's cutthroat out there, new players popping up all the time. So how does a company like Hamilton Lane, how do they not just survive, but actually thrive in such a crowded space?
Yeah, you've hit on a really important point. Being able to adapt to stay ahead of the game, that's crucial for any company that wants to be successful in the long run.
Especially in the world of finance.
Absolutely. And you're right, the investment world is not for the faint of heart.
No kidding.
But Hamilton Lane, they've got a few tricks up their sleeve, a few things that give them an edge, you know?
Like?
Well, their global reach, for one. They're not just some small-time operation. Their 2023 report, I think, really highlighted this. They've got offices all over the place.
Yeah, their global presence is pretty impressive.
It gives them access to a much wider range of investment opportunities than a lot of their competitors.
They're everywhere.
Exactly. It's like having a presence on every continent gives them a leg up.
Makes sense. Cast a wider net.
Exactly.
But it's not just about being everywhere, right?
Yes, got it.
You got to know what you're doing in those markets, too.
Exactly. You need the expertise.
And they've got that.
Oh, yeah. They spent years building up their reputation in the private markets.
And building relationships, right?
Huge.
That takes time.
It does. You can't rush that. And it's something that they really emphasize in their reports, the importance of those strong, long-term relationships with their clients.
Trust is everything in this business.
Especially when you're talking about these kinds of high-stakes investments.
Absolutely. But you know something else that struck me while I was going through their 10Ks?
What's that?
Their focus on data and technology. They kept mentioning these proprietary databases and analytical tools they've built. It's like they're not just relying on gut instinct, you know?
You're right. They're bringing some serious data power to the table.
It's like they're playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
I like that analogy.
But seriously, how much of an advantage would you say that gives them?
I'd say it's huge. I mean, think about it. These aren't just any databases.
Wow.
This is exclusive information they've compiled. Yeah.
Data on companies, markets, trends.
Stuff their competitors don't have.
Exactly. It's like having a secret weapon.
So they're using all this data to spot opportunities, trends.
And to make smarter investment decisions.
Which then hopefully leads to better returns for their clients.
Exactly.
It's all connected.
It is.
But all this data, I mean, it makes you wonder about cybersecurity, right?
That's a really good point. You're talking about a lot of sensitive information.
Exactly. And they do mention it a bit in the reports.
Yeah. They've definitely taken steps to protect themselves.
But in this day and age,
It's a constant battle.
it feels like there are new threats popping up every day.
Oh, absolutely.
So how confident can they really be in their security measures?
Well, based on their 2024 10K, it seems like they've taken a very proactive and multi-layered approach to cybersecurity. Like what?
Well, for one, they've brought in external cybersecurity experts to really put their systems to the test.
Oh, interesting.
They're also constantly running these simulated attacks.
Wait, so they're like trying to hack themselves?
Essentially, yeah. It's the best way to find any weaknesses before the bad guys do.
That's actually pretty smart.
And it's not just about the technology either.
Right, there's the human element too.
Exactly. They've made cybersecurity awareness training mandatory for all their employees.
Make sure everyone's up to speed.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they're taking it seriously,
They are.
which is good to hear.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. From their unique ownership structure to their commitment to DEI, their specialized services, their data-driven approach to investing. It's been fascinating to get this behind-the-scenes look at what makes Hamilton Lane tick.
I agree. It just goes to show you how much valuable information is hidden in plain sight in these financial reports.
Right. They might not be the most exciting reads,
Definitely not bedtime stories.
but they're full of these little nuggets of wisdom.
for those willing to take the time to really dig in.
Absolutely. As always, it's been a pleasure picking your brain.
The pleasure is all mine.
And for everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Hamilton Lane. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's always more to explore, more to learn. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and who knows, maybe you'll uncover some hidden gems of knowledge yourself. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.